Imagine spending decades building the most imposing castle in Europe, with walls thick enough to laugh at any army, towers tall enough to see enemies coming from miles away. Now imagine watching a single cannonball reduce all that work to rubble in about 6 hours. That's exactly what happened when gunpowder arrived on European battlefields, and it changed warfare forever. Suddenly, every massive medieval fortress became a death trap, and rulers across the continent faced a terrifying question. How do you defend yourself when everything you've built is suddenly obsolete? Well, the answer involved geometry, a star-shaped design that looks mental, and some of the cleverest military engineering in history. Buckle up, because this story is properly fascinating. For centuries, castles were everything in medieval Europe. They weren't just buildings, they were power itself. Whoever controlled the strongest fortress controlled all the land around it. Simply as that. And for ages, this system worked brilliantly. Build your castle on a hill, make the walls thick, stick some towers on top, and you're basically untouchable. Sieges could drag on for months or even years, because attacking a well-defended castle was absolute hell. Then gunpowder showed up. At first, nobody was particularly worried. Early cannons were loud, messy, and frankly a bit rubbish. They exploded as often as they fired properly. But here's the thing about technology. It improves fast when people are trying to kill each other. The first time a cannonball properly shattered a castle wall, everyone suddenly understood. This wasn't just another weapon. This was a game changer. Sieges that used to take months could now be decided in a single afternoon, and the entire rule book of medieval warfare got chucked straight out the window. All those impressive tall towers that made castles look so powerful, they became liabilities overnight. The taller your wall, the easier it was for artillery to knock it down. Didn't matter how thick the stone was. Physics had finally caught up with military architecture, and physics was winning. By the end of the 15th century, Europe was absolutely covered in castles that no longer worked. They still looked brilliant, don't get me wrong. Proper, imposing, but they couldn't actually do their job anymore. They were basically expensive monuments to an older, simpler time. And as more of them fell to cannon fire, one question started keeping every ruler, every general, and every military engineer awake at night. How on earth do you build something that can actually survive artillery? That question led to something completely new, a type of fortress that looked nothing like the castles that came before it. And it all started in Italy. When gunpowder began reshaping warfare, Europe didn't just give up on fortifications. Instead, they completely reimagined them from scratch. This transformation kicked off in Italy right at the start of the Renaissance, when architects and engineers were beginning to look at war through a more scientific lens. Those old, round towers that once looked so intimidating, they'd become perfect targets. A cannonball would hit the curved surface dead-on, sending all its energy straight into the wall. Within hours, what took decades to build could collapse into dust. Absolutely devastating. So builders started experimenting with something radical. Instead of curves, they began working with angles. Sharp ones. The key to survival wasn't making walls thicker. It was about geometry. If every wall could support the next one, and every angle could cover its neighbor, the fortress could defend itself as a complete system rather than just a collection of separate towers. It's a bit like having teammates watching your back in every direction simultaneously. Each bastion protected the one beside it, forming this perfect network of sightlines and crossfire. From above, the whole fortress looked like a star, symmetrical, precise, almost too mathematical to belong to the Middle Ages. It wasn't stronger by accident. It was stronger by design. Stone on the outside for hardness, then brick, then packed earth inside. When a cannonball hit, the wall didn't shatter like glass. It flexed slightly, spreading the force through layers that could absorb it. Inside the fortress, the same clever thinking continued. Passages curved slightly so blast waves from explosions wouldn't travel too far. It was practical, efficient, and built to last through the most brutal sieges imaginable. And as these designs spread across Europe, the entire concept of what a fortress could be started changing completely. As these new forts spread, one feature quickly became their signature element. The bastion. It looked fairly simple at first glance, just a triangular platform sticking out from the main wall. But the idea behind it was absolutely brilliant. That meant no attacker could get close without being seen from at least two directions. This design completely changed how sieges worked because it took away the attacker's biggest advantage, the ability to find cover and approach safely. Every open space in front of the fort was exposed. The closer you got, the worse your situation became. It was properly brutal for anyone trying to attack. Everything in that layout served a clear purpose. No decoration, no wasted space, just pure function. As the shape of these fortresses evolved, so did the weapons inside them. Each bastion wasn't built for defenders with medieval bows anymore. It was designed for a new generation of artillery and firearms. Heavy cannons were positioned along the outer walls, aimed to sweep the open ground between bastions. Proper, devastating. Behind the cannons sat smaller guns, called lighter, faster-firing pieces used to hit targets that slipped past the main batteries. And higher up on the ramparts, soldiers with early muskets filled in the gaps. Their job wasn't stopping an entire army, but making sure nobody could get close enough to plant explosives or scale the walls. Together, it created layered firepower, slow and heavy at distance, fast and precise up close, like having multiple defensive rings that attackers had to survive through. Inside the fortress, everything was organized with the same meticulous planning. Gunpowder was stored deep underground in dry chambers to prevent catastrophic explosions. Air vents carried away smoke after each cannon shot so crews wouldn't suffocate in their own positions. Life inside these walls was tough, but everything worked like clockwork. Every gun crew knew its position. Every soldier knew exactly where to go when alarms sounded. The whole place felt less like a medieval castle and more like a machine specifically built to survive long enough to make the enemy give up. Once these star-shaped forts appeared, attacking them became an entirely different kind of warfare. A direct assault was completely pointless. Anyone trying to storm the walls would be cut down before getting anywhere close. So instead of charging heroically, armies began to dig. They built trenches in long zigzag lines, slowly creeping toward the fortress under a thin layer of protection. Every few meters, they'd stop, reinforce the trench, and move their artillery forward, trying to get close enough to do actual damage. As weeks, turned into months. The battlefield began looking like an absolute maze. Trenches zigzagged everywhere. Counter trenches cut them off, and the entire area became a grid of mud, smoke, and desperation. For attackers, it was all about endurance. Every day spent in those trenches meant more disease, more fatigue, and fewer men capable of fighting. For defenders, it was about patience and discipline. If they held long enough, if their supplies lasted, the enemy usually left first. And that's what made these sieges so different from medieval warfare. They weren't won by bravery or speed. They were won by whoever understood the mathematics of survival better. Proper grim, when you think about it. By the 16th century, the Bastion fortress wasn't just a clever idea anymore. It had become the military standard across most of Europe. Kings and republics alike were spending absolutely massive sums to modernize their defenses, and entire regions began changing shape because of these fortifications. But over time, success brought its own problems. The more forts were built, the more armies learned how to attack them. By the late 17th century, sieges had become almost predictable. Engineers on both sides followed the same principles, and wars turned into slow mathematical routines. You could look at a map and estimate exactly how long a fortress would last. Before it became less about strategy and more about numbers and supplies. Then artillery changed again. New weapons could fire shells in high arcs, dropping them straight into courtyards that once felt safe. The very geometry that made these forts unbeatable now worked against them. Those low, flat shapes that deflected cannonballs beautifully offered absolutely no protection from above. And just like that, the age of the Star Fortress began to fade. They were still admired for their precision and beauty, but warfare had already moved on to new technologies and tactics. Even after they stopped being militarily practical, star forts never really disappeared. Many were simply too well built to destroy. And over time they found new purposes. Some became prisons, which makes sense, given their security. Others turned into military museums where you can still walk through those brilliant geometric defenses. And a few, like the fortifications at Palmanova in Italy or Bertinge in the Netherlands, turned into entire living towns. People built houses inside the walls, opened markets in the old courtyards, and gradually civilian life replaced the sound of cannon fire. Today, you can visit these places and see exactly how this revolutionary design worked. This whole story fascinates me because it shows how technology can make everything you've built completely obsolete, almost overnight. Medieval castles ruled Europe for centuries. Then gunpowder appeared, and suddenly they were death traps. So engineers adapted, created these brilliant star-shaped fortresses, and those dominated for another few centuries until artillery evolved again. It's a constant cycle of innovation and adaptation, and those star fortresses represent a moment when military engineering became genuinely scientific. When builders stopped relying on tradition and started using mathematics and geometry to solve problems. If this story got you thinking about how warfare and architecture intersect, smash that like button and let me know in the comments what other historical military innovations you'd like to hear about. The suggestions you lot give are brilliant. And if you want more content about how technology changed history, about clever engineering solutions, and about those moments when everything people knew suddenly became obsolete, then hit subscribe, because I've got loads more fascinating stories coming. Until next time, remember tease. No matter how strong your defenses seem, there's always someone working out how to get through them. The only constant in warfare is change. Cheers for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.